My name is Eleanor, and I'm 67 years old. People who meet me now, with my silver hair and gentle smile, might think my life has always been a quiet, peaceful thing, a simple tapestry of routines and memories. But that's not entirely true. My life has been a whirlwind of love, loss, and sacrifice, a story I've lived with my whole heart. But the most recent chapter, the one that changed everything, began on a Thursday evening in my dining room, a room that had always been a sanctuary of family and love. I spent the whole day preparing for dinner. The house filled with the warm, comforting scent of roasting chicken and mushroom sauce, a dish Daniel, my son, had loved since he was a boy. I polished my finest china until it gleamed and set the table with the crystal glasses I inherited from my mother. It was a ritual of love I'd performed 1,000 times, and each detail was a memory. The salt shakers, the napkins folded just so, every item held a story of a family built on care and quiet devotion. My son Daniel, my one and only, arrived first. I saw the signs immediately. He was nervous, his eyes darting around the room, unable to meet my gaze. He wore that anxious expression he'd had since he was a little boy trying to hide a secret. Then Jessica, his wife, floated in behind him, elegant in an expensive dress, and a forced smile I'd grown to know too well. It was the smile she used when she was about to do something unpleasant. I had tried, in the 6 years they'd been married, to be the perfect mother-in-law. I'd baked her favorite pastries and attended all her art gallery shows, even though I didn't understand modern art. I'd offered advice when asked and, more importantly, stayed silent when it wasn't. But nothing I did ever seemed to be enough. Jessica always had to prove her own superiority. During dinner, the criticism began subtly. The wine was a little too dry. The music was a bit too old-fashioned. My house, which I'd lived in for 40 years, was suddenly so dated. She looked at the heavy mahogany furniture I'd inherited and scoffed. "Eleanor, don't you think it's time you freshened this place up a bit? My mother's house is so much more modern. She has those trendy minimalist pieces." My heart sank a little with each word. This house was a part of me. Every piece of furniture held a memory of my late husband, of Daniel's childhood. I smiled, trying to maintain harmony, but inside, my irritation was a growing fire. I'd loved Daniel with my whole heart, and had supported him in every decision. For the last 6 months, that support had been financial. He had come to me, tears in his eyes, saying he'd lost his job and couldn't pay the rent. "Mom, it'll only be for a few months until I find something," he'd said with that broken voice that always disarmed me. And like any mother who loves her child, I didn't hesitate. I dipped into my savings, the money I'd worked my whole life for, and started paying their rent without Jessica's knowledge. "It's our secret, Mom," he'd pleaded. "I don't want Jessica to feel bad about depending on you." I now realize how naive I was to believe he was protecting his wife's pride. He was protecting his own image. While I was sacrificing my life savings, eating rice and eggs for dinner to save every penny, they lived as if nothing had changed. They posted pictures of expensive dinners and exotic vacations on social media. They saw me as a bottomless bank account, someone inferior they could humiliate without consequence. When it was time for dessert, I thought the worst was over. I had prepared Daniel's favorite, a homemade vanilla pudding he'd loved since he was a little boy. I watched him take a spoonful, hoping for a moment of quiet gratitude. But Jessica's voice, sharp and cold, cut through the silence. "You're not half the woman my mother is." The words sliced through the air. The impact was like a slap to my face. A profound silence fell over the dining room. My heart pounded in my chest, a rhythm of shock and disbelief. Jessica looked at me with a cruel smile, as if she'd been waiting all night for the perfect moment to wound me. Daniel's head was down, his gaze fixed on his plate. He didn't say a word. "Excuse me." I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. Jessica leaned back in her chair with a false elegance, as if she were the owner of my house, and repeated the words with even greater cruelty. You heard me, Eleanor. My mother is a successful, independent woman who built her own empire. She's never needed anyone. She has her own company, her beach house in Florida, her trips to Europe. Well, you just know how to bake and sew. Each word hammered at my heart, a painful reminder of my life's work. I thought of the countless hours I'd spent at my sewing machine, the dresses I'd made for other people's weddings, the long nights mending clothes to pay for Daniel's college tuition. I had built a life on love and quiet strength, a life she now dismissed as worthless. And then, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, angry snap, but a deep, quiet one, a final shattering of my illusions. All the years of sacrifice, of being taken for granted, of being treated with contempt, suddenly flooded my mind. For 6 months, I had been the one paying for the roof over their arrogant heads. For 6 months, my unconditional love had become my greatest weakness. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling an adrenaline rush I hadn't felt in years. With a chilling serenity that surprised even me, I pushed my chair back and replied, "Then she can start paying your rent." The silence was so profound, I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Daniel went completely pale. "Rent? What rent?" he yelled, his eyes wide. At that moment, I knew my life was about to change forever. The quiet woman they had taken for granted was gone. And this revelation was just the beginning of a story no one, not even me, saw coming. My son, Daniel, looked at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. The color had drained from his face, leaving him pale and terrified. "Rent? What rent?" he cried out, his voice a panicked squawk. He was looking at me, but his words were meant for Jessica, a desperate plea for her to understand that he hadn't told her. "The rent for your apartment," I said, my voice as steady as a stone. "The $900 a month that comes from my bank account on the 5th of every month." I watched, detached, as the carefully constructed reality they had lived in for 6 months began to crumble. "You told me you had worked out a payment plan with the landlord, Daniel. You made me believe you were a responsible man taking care of his responsibilities." Daniel's gaze flickered between me and Jessica, a look of a trapped animal in his eyes. He stammered, "Mom, I never." Jessica's silence broke with a gasp. Her face, which moments ago held a look of supreme superiority, now contorted into pure fury. Her eyes, fixed on Daniel, blazed with a murderous light. "What?" she spat, the word a blade of ice. "You let me believe you were providing for us. You let me spend like everything was normal while you were taking money from your mother behind my back." The irony was not lost on me. Jessica wasn't angry that they were living off my savings. She was angry that Daniel had made her look foolish. The mask had slipped, revealing the true nature of their relationship, a transactional bond built on lies and convenience. Daniel had been a middleman, a fragile bridge between his wife's luxurious life and his mother's money. My heart ached, not for them, but for the life I had been living. I watched them in the quiet of my dining room, their heated exchange of violent ballet of accusation and blame. I had been so convinced that my sacrifice was a temporary thing, a quiet act of love for my son, until he got back on his feet. But in that moment, I realized my unconditional love had only been an enabler for their immaturity. "You should know what that money cost me," I said, my voice gaining strength. The sound of their fighting stopped. They turned to me, their faces a chaotic mix of anger and shock. "You think I'm a simple woman who only knows how to bake and sew? Do you know what I did with the money I made from those things?" The dam of my sacrifice broke, and the words flowed out like a torrent. "I had a system. I had to, so you wouldn't notice. For 6 months, I stopped buying meat to save money. I started wearing the same pair of broken shoes because I couldn't afford new ones. I skipped my arthritis medicine because it was too expensive. My eyes welled with tears, not from sadness, but from a profound and burning rage. Do you know what I did last week to make sure your rent was paid on time? I sold my husband's wedding ring. That ring, the last tangible piece of the man who loved me, the one thing I held onto as my most prized treasure. I sold it for you too. The words landed on them like stones. Jessica's face went pale. Daniel, his shoulders slumped, looked at me with an expression of such broken, pathetic remorse that it almost moved me. But I remembered his silence when Jessica had insulted me, and my heart hardened again. And you, I said, looking at Jessica. You had the audacity to compare me to your mother, a woman who hasn't had to worry about a single bill in her life. A woman you've never had to support. I sacrificed my past, my present, my health, and the memory of a good man, all so you could live in luxury while you disrespect me in my own home. I looked at them both, my son and his wife. They were like two children caught in a lie, but the stakes were higher than a broken vase. They had broken my trust, my heart, and my faith. I had nothing left to give them. I walked to the dining room door and opened it wide, the cool night air rushing in. I am a mother, and mothers don't abandon their children, I said, the words heavy with finality. But I'm not abandoning my son. I am stopping him from using me. The lease is up in 30 days. You have that long to figure out your next step. Now, get out of my house. The words were final, an edict from a queen. Daniel slowly rose from his chair, his head bowed. Jessica, her face blotchy and her elegance gone, rushed past him and out the door. Daniel paused, looking at me with a desperate, silent plea. But I had nothing left to say. I closed the door behind them and stood there in the silent room, the empty chairs a stark reminder of the wreckage they had left. The ritual of love was broken. But I had finally found my voice, and for the first time in a very long time, I was free. A week. 7 days had passed since I had opened my door and my mouth, letting out a truth that had been locked inside me for months. 7 days since I had told my son and his wife that the money had run out, that the free ride was over. And in those 7 days, a silence had fallen over my life that I had not heard in years. It was a beautiful silence. My home, once a place of forced smiles and quiet tension, now felt like a sanctuary again. I spent the week doing things for myself, things I had sacrificed to save money for them. I bought a new pair of shoes to replace the worn-out ones. I ate a piece of fresh salmon for dinner. I sat in my garden and simply read a book, without the constant background anxiety of a looming crisis. It was the first time in a very long time that I didn't feel like a resource, a bank account with legs. I felt like a person. I knew, from the absence of frantic phone calls and panicked text messages, what was happening on the other side of town. The silence was a language all its own. They had been left without a safety net, their lavish lifestyle completely cut off. I pictured them in their beautiful apartment, the one I had paid for, the one filled with clothes and gadgets they couldn't afford on their own. I imagined the landlord's calls, the overdue notices, the slow, sinking panic as they realized their house of cards was falling down. My phone, a constant source of their needs for so long, had been mercifully quiet. Until it wasn't. The ring was so loud, so jarring in the peaceful quiet of my home that it made me jump. I saw Daniel's name on the screen and my heart, despite everything, felt a pang of a mother's worry. But I also felt a deep, unwavering calm. I answered the call, my voice a simple, hello. Eleanor, thank God you answered. We've been trying to reach you all week. The voice wasn't Daniel's. It was Jessica's, and it was no longer smug or condescending. It was shrill, desperate, and filled with a blind panic I had never heard before. Where have you been, Eleanor? Daniel's been so upset. Our landlord is threatening to evict us. We have nowhere to go. Her words tumbled over each other, a torrent of accusations and fear. I've been right here, Jessica, I replied, my voice calm. I told you what would happen. But this is your fault. You just abandoned us. Why would you do that to your son? To your family, she demanded, her voice rising in hysteria. Jessica, I said, my voice steady, I told you a week ago that I would no longer be paying your rent. It seems you and Daniel didn't believe me. You two are adults. You will figure this out. But Daniel lost his job. We have no money. We have nowhere to go. You're his mother, Eleanor. You have to help us, she pleaded, the words now laced with a frantic desperation. I heard Daniel's voice in the background, a muffled argument that I couldn't quite make out. It was then that Jessica, in a final act of desperation, turned on her own husband. This is your fault, Daniel. You promised me you'd fix this. You said she would come through. Why did you lie to me? The phone went silent for a moment, as she probably pulled the receiver away from her ear to continue their argument. I heard Daniel's broken voice, followed by Jessica's angry accusations. I listened for a moment, detached from their chaos, a silent witness to the unraveling of a relationship I had been subsidizing for months. When Jessica's voice came back, it was a whisper. Eleanor, please. You have to help us. Just for one more month. We'll find a way to pay you back. We can't be homeless. My heart ached, but I knew I couldn't go back. To give them more money would be to enable their lies and disrespect all over again. It would be a betrayal of the promise I had made to myself. No, Jessica, I said, my voice a soft but firm finality. I'm sorry. I can't. There was a defeated gasp on the other end of the line before the call went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, a heavy sigh escaping my lips. For a moment, a wave of sadness washed over me. I had lost my son, or rather, I had lost the idea of the son I thought I had. But the sadness was quickly replaced by a sense of peace. I had done the right thing. I had set a boundary, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. Just as I placed the phone back on its stand, it rang again. My heart sank, expecting more frantic pleas from Daniel or Jessica. But the number on the screen was unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail, but for some reason, a strange curiosity compelled me to answer. Hello. I said cautiously. Eleanor. Is that you? The voice on the other end was deep and warm, a voice that carried a ghost of a familiar accent from a different life. Who is this? I asked, my brow furrowed in confusion. There was a soft chuckle. It's William. William Carter. I can't believe I found you after all these years. William. The name landed in the quiet of my home like a bomb. The boy who had been my first love, the man who had asked me to come to America with him 50 years ago, a man I had chosen not to follow. He was gone, a memory from another time. But now, here he was. His voice, a voice I had not heard in half a century, was on the other end of the line, telling me that he had found me after all these years. My peaceful sanctuary was suddenly filled with the possibility of a life I thought was lost forever. The phone call from William had left me feeling like a ship untethered from its port. For 50 years, my life had been a series of predictable seasons, from a young wife to a grieving widow, a struggling mother to a quiet grandmother. Each role was a responsibility I wore with a certain kind of pride. But now, here was a voice from my past, offering an alternative reality. A life of uncharted waters. And honestly, it terrified me. The fear wasn't of William himself. The memory of him, ambitious, brilliant, kind, was as clear as a photograph in my mind. The fear was of me. What if I was wrong? What if the life I had so painstakingly built was all I was meant to have? What if the loneliness Valerie had so cruelly used as a weapon was, in fact, my destiny? For so many years, the emptiness of my life was filled with the chaos of my sons. Now, with that chaos gone, I felt the vast, cold space of being alone. The voice of doubt whispered that I was too old, that I had missed my chance, that this was just a foolish, romantic notion I would regret. I knew I needed to talk to someone. Not to Daniel, whose manipulative pleas I had just escaped, but to my oldest and dearest friend, Martha. She had seen me through every chapter of my life, the joyful ones and the heart-wrenching ones. I went to her house that afternoon, and she hugged me tightly the moment she saw me. "You're glowing, Eleanor," she said, her eyes twinkling. "But you also look like you're about to jump off a cliff." I laughed, a little hoarsely, and told her everything. The insult, the revelation, the chaos, and finally, the phone call from William. I laid it all out for her, the good and the bad. What if I'm making a terrible mistake, Martha? What if he's changed? What if I'm just replacing one dependency with another? Martha sat across from me, her expression one of loving certainty. "Eleanor," she said, taking my hand in hers. "You have spent your entire life being a safety net for everyone else. You've sacrificed every dream you've ever had for your son and his wife. This isn't about running away. This is about finally running toward something you deserve." She looked at me, her eyes firm. "Daniel and Jessica didn't love you for who you were. They loved you for what you could give. They treated you with contempt while they used your money. You don't owe them anything, Eleanor. You owe yourself this chance." Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. She was right. This wasn't a choice made out of spite or confusion. It was a choice born from a newfound sense of self-worth. In the days that followed, William and I talked for hours on the phone. He didn't just listen to my stories, he heard them. He asked about my love of books, about my years as a librarian, about the things that made my heart feel full. For the first time in decades, I was talking to someone who saw me not just as a mother or a widow, but as a person with my own dreams and experiences. During one of our late-night calls, I told him about my lifelong dream of seeing the Pacific Ocean, of standing on a coast where the world just seemed to stretch out forever. There was a soft silence on his end. Then he said, his voice as gentle as a whisper, "Eleanor, my dear. I live just a few blocks from the Pacific coast. I have a deck that looks out over the ocean, with the most beautiful sunsets you've ever seen. I would be honored if you would come and see them with me." He waited for my response, but there was no pressure in his voice, only a quiet, hopeful invitation. "I know it's a lot to ask," he continued. "I know it's crazy. But I've always wondered what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to ask you to come with me all those years ago. Now I'm asking. I want to show you Washington State, introduce you to my children, and simply see the woman you've become." The words were an offering of a life I thought was impossible. I hung up the phone and walked to my bedroom, a profound sense of clarity settling over me. I took out a faded photo from my nightstand. It was a picture of me at 20, my hair a rich auburn, my eyes full of an audacious, fearless hope. The person in that picture seemed like a stranger. When had I stopped being that person? I looked at the photo, and then I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was silver now, and my eyes held the wisdom of 70 years, but something new was there too, a spark, a quiet determination. That young woman had sacrificed everything for the life she chose, and I didn't regret that choice. But now, the life she had dreamed of was knocking on the door. It was time to open it. He thought of the look on her face when Jessica had insulted her. He had been silent. Why? He had allowed his own mother to be humiliated in her own home. He had let his fear of his wife's disapproval, his shame at his own failures, drown out the love he felt for the woman who had given him everything. He wasn't just a liar, he was a coward. He had taken and taken and taken, and had given nothing in return. He drove to a community center he had seen a sign for. The flyer on the door promised free services, including therapy. He was desperate. He walked in, his clothes wrinkled, his body aching, and told a receptionist he needed to talk to someone. He didn't know what to say, but the words came out in a torrent of shame and grief. He confessed to a quiet, patient therapist about his endless cycle of failure, his job losses, his lies, and the way he had used his mother's love as a crutch. "What you've developed is an emotional addiction to being rescued," the therapist said, his voice calm and clear. "Every time your mother gave you money, every time she pulled you out of a difficult situation, you felt a rush of relief. It's like a drug, isn't it?" Daniel nodded, a sob catching in his throat. He had never heard it described that way, but it was the truth. The only way to break the addiction is to face the consequences of your own actions without a safety net. For the first time in years, Daniel felt hope. He was raw and broken, but he was also seeing clearly. He left the center with a plan. He applied for a low-paying, but honest job at a cleaning company. The work was difficult, long hours of physical labor, but the first paycheck filled him with a sense of pride he had never felt before. He found a small, single room to rent downtown, a cramped space with a shared bathroom, but it was his. He was paying his own way. He was an adult. He bought a cheap cell phone with his first paycheck, and with trembling hands, dialed a number he hadn't called in weeks. His mother's phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's me. I know I don't deserve to call you. I'm not calling to ask for money or help. I'm calling to tell you that I've gotten a job. I'm in therapy. And I'm going to work on becoming the kind of son you can be proud of." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a second, he thought she had hung up. But then he heard her soft, trembling voice. "I'm glad to hear that, Robert," she said, using the name she'd used for him when he was a child. The name that meant her forgiveness. His heart, for the first time in a very long time, felt whole. He was finally on the path home. The phone call came 2 days after my conversation with William. It was Daniel. His voice was different this time. There was no panic, no desperation, just a quiet, steady tone I hadn't heard in years. He didn't ask for money. He didn't even mention Jessica. He simply asked if we could talk, truly talk, before I left. I invited him over that afternoon. He arrived alone, and I saw a man I hadn't seen in a very long time. His clothes were simple but clean, his shoulders were no longer slumped in defeat, and his eyes, though tired, were clear. He didn't sit in the dining room where the confrontation had taken place. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, the place where all of our most honest conversations had happened when he was a boy. "Mom," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I'm in therapy. I've been going every day. And my therapist helped me understand so much about myself that I didn't want to see." He took a deep breath, and I watched him with a mother's heart, both aching and swelling with pride. He helped me see that my failures weren't just a string of bad luck. I was addicted to being rescued. The word addicted was a jolt, but it resonated with a painful truth. He told me that by constantly rescuing me, you were unintentionally depriving me of the opportunity to grow. Daniel's eyes welled with tears, but he held my gaze. "Every time you stepped in, every time you gave me money, you took away my chance to learn from my mistakes. You were loving me, but you were also enabling my dependency." I listened in silence, my heart feeling as if it were both breaking and healing at the same time. His words hurt, but they also freed me from the guilt I had carried for years. My generosity, my love, had been a beautiful thing, but it had also been a cage for both of us. "I know it's not your fault," he quickly added, seeing the pain in my expression. It's mine. I always knew you'd be there. I never had to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it. He didn't ask for my forgiveness. He just offered his truth, and in that moment, our relationship began to heal. I told him about my plans for Seattle. I spoke of William, not as a boyfriend, but as an old friend. I told him about the opportunity to write a book about my life, a dream I had long buried. He listened with genuine interest, and when I was finished, his face broke into a gentle smile. Mom, that's amazing, he said, and for the first time, it felt like he truly meant it. You have to go. You have to do this for yourself. The day of my departure dawned with a clear sky and a gentle breeze that felt like a promise of good things to come. Daniel arrived early to take me to the airport. There was no tension in the car, no awkward silence. We talked about everyday things, the weather, his new job, the small room he had rented downtown. It was the first normal conversation we had had in years. At the airport, Daniel helped me take my luggage from the car. The suitcase felt light in my hands, a simple bag for a new life, a new chapter. He walked me to the security gate, and when it was time to say goodbye, we hugged with an intensity we hadn't shared since he was a little boy. I felt his arms around me, strong and steady, no longer trembling with a need for rescue, but with a new, quiet confidence. He pulled back, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I love you, Mom, he whispered in my ear. Have fun. Fall in love. Be happy. You deserve it more than anyone in the world. And in that moment, I knew I had not lost my son. I had simply set him free to become a man. As I walked through the security gate, a single woman on her way to a new city, I felt a sense of peace that was both profound and exhilarating. My future was no longer defined by the needs of others. It was mine, and it was filled with the promise of a life I never knew I could have. The air in Seattle was different. It wasn't the familiar, humid air of my hometown, but something crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of the sea. I stepped off the plane, a single woman on a new adventure, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was walking into a story that was all my own. The airport hummed with the energy of 1,000 new journeys, but my eyes were only searching for one face. And then I saw him. He was standing near the gate with a bouquet of yellow roses, the very flowers he had described in his garden. His hair was completely white, and there were more wrinkles around his eyes than I remembered, but his smile was the same, broad, warm, and utterly genuine. When he saw me, his face lit up with a joy that seemed to erase the 50 years that had separated us. Eleanor, he said, his voice as deep and comforting as I remembered. He walked toward me, and when he wrapped me in a hug, it was a hug that felt like coming home. It was the closing of a circle that had been left open for half a century. You're even more beautiful than I remembered. The words were not flattery. They were an honest reflection of the light I now carried within me. As we walked toward his car, he took my small suitcase and told me he had a day full of surprises planned. He spoke with an easy charm, his words not to impress, but to share. He was not the ambitious young man I had left behind, but a man who had built a life, learned from his mistakes, and now had the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are. His house was everything I had imagined and more. It was bright and airy, with large windows that let in the sunlight, and showed a breathtaking view of the Pacific Ocean. My home was filled with the musty memories of the past. This house was a canvas for a beautiful present. He showed me his garden, a vibrant space overflowing with orange and yellow flowers. He pointed out the deck, where he said we would watch the sunsets. For a week, we lived in a bubble of easy companionship and rediscovered friendship. William took me on long drives along the coast, telling me stories about the city and his life. He introduced me to his children, who welcomed me with a genuine warmth that moved me deeply. His youngest daughter, Carmen said, "Dad hasn't smiled like this since Mom died. Thank you for bringing back his joy." The words touched a chord deep in my heart. But the most beautiful parts of the week were our long, late-night conversations. We sat on his deck, bundled in blankets, watching the stars appear one by one. I told him about my years as a seamstress, the wedding dresses I had sewn, the clothes I had mended. I spoke about my son, my sacrifices, and the pain of feeling invisible. He listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on me as if my words were the most important thing he had ever heard. "You know, Eleanor," he said one night, as he handed me a cup of hot cocoa, "a woman your age with your experience is a treasure." He paused, looking out at the dark horizon of the ocean. "You have stories to tell, wisdom to share, and love to give." He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "Any man would be lucky to have your company, your conversation, your affection." His words went straight to my heart, because they expressed exactly what I felt with him. With him, I wasn't Robert's sacrificial mother. I wasn't Charles's widow. I wasn't the tired seamstress. I was simply Eleanor, a woman with a past to reflect on and a future to build. He saw me as a person, a treasure, not as a resource. As I sat there, watching the moon cast a silver light on the waves, I reflected on the painful words from Jessica. She had said I was not half the woman her mother was. But in William's eyes, I was not half of anything. I was a whole person, valuable and loved, just for being me. And in the quiet of that moment, I knew that the pain I had endured was, in fact, the greatest gift I could have received, because it had led me to this beautiful, peaceful new beginning. The days that followed were a beautiful blur, a symphony of new sights and sounds that replaced the quiet hum of my old life. The scent of the salty air, the distant cry of the gulls, the rich aroma of the coffee William made for me every morning, each sensory detail was a brick in a new, solid foundation of peace and joy. William was a constant presence, a gentle current in a sea of change. He didn't rush me. He simply existed beside me, listening to me, sharing his own stories, and making me feel like the most interesting person in the world. He had a way of looking at me that was different from anyone I had ever known. It wasn't the look of a son who saw a safety net, or a husband who saw a quiet companion. It was the look of a man who saw an equal, a friend, a treasure. He would listen as I talked about my life, the quiet victories of a retired seamstress, the stories of the people I had met, the secrets I had kept. He would nod, his eyes twinkling, and he'd often say, "Eleanor, my dear, you have a writer's soul." The words landed softly at first, a passing comment. But they began to settle in my mind, taking root like a seed in fertile soil. One afternoon, while sitting in his sun-drenched study, surrounded by his own collection of books, I felt a familiar stirring inside me. It was the old passion, the one I had buried beneath the weight of sacrifice and responsibility. I had always wanted to write. To document a life that I felt was full of quiet, uncelebrated stories. But I had never felt I had the right to. My stories, I had always believed, were too small. I went to a small stationery store downtown and bought a notebook. It was a beautiful, leather-bound journal with creamy, unlined pages. I bought a set of good pens, the kind that glide across the paper, leaving a smooth, dark trail. I returned to William's house, and in the quiet of my room, I began to write. The first words were a torrent of pain and anger. I wrote about the humiliation, about the insult from Jessica, about the sting of Daniel's betrayal. I wrote for hours, my pen a tool to chisel away at the hardened layers of my heart. I wrote about the emptiness of living a life for others, of sacrificing my dreams to maintain a facade of a happy family. I wrote until my hand ached and the pages were stained with the tears I hadn't even realized I was crying. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation. I was not just writing a story, I was reclaiming it. I was taking back my narrative from those who had tried to steal it, to diminish it, to define me by what I could give them, not by who I was. In the days that followed, my writing took on a different tone. The anger faded, replaced by a deep and profound reflection. I wrote about my love for my late husband, about the joy of raising my son, about the lessons I had learned from my quiet life. I wrote about the beauty of a simple home, the scent of fresh bread, the feeling of a needle and thread in my hand. I wrote about the woman I was before I became a mother, and the woman I was becoming now. The words came to me in a flow, a river of memories that had been dammed up for so long. One evening, William found me on the deck, my notebook in my lap, lost in my thoughts. He sat beside me, offering a glass of wine without saying a word. After a moment, he said softly, "What are you writing about, Eleanor?" I hesitated. I was still used to a life where my private world was just that, private. But with him, I felt a new sense of safety. I told him about the book, about the idea of telling my story. "I feel like a whole person again, William," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm not just a mother or a widow. I'm Eleanor, a woman with my own stories, my own purpose." He looked at me with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "A woman your age with your experience is a treasure," he said, his voice as soft as a whisper. "You have stories to tell, wisdom to share, and love to give." He took my hand in his. "And I would be honored to read every one of your chapters." His words were not just an invitation to share my book, they were an invitation to share my life. I had never felt so seen, so valued, so cherished. He didn't just love the idea of me, he loved the reality of me. He loved the woman who had sacrificed everything, and he wanted to be the man who helped her get a little bit of it back. The next day, we took a long walk on the beach. The air was cool and crisp, and the ocean stretched out before us, a vast, beautiful blue. We walked in a comfortable silence, our hands linked, the sound of the waves a gentle rhythm. William stopped and turned to me, his eyes filled with a clear and unwavering certainty. "Eleanor," he said, his voice steady, "I have no claim to your past. Your life before me was full of love and loss and triumph that I wasn't a part of. But I've been a part of this new chapter, and it is the most beautiful story I have ever known. I don't want it to end. I want to build a life with you. I want to build a home with you, a life filled with sunsets and new adventures and quiet moments." My heart began to beat so fast it felt as if it were a hummingbird's wings in my chest. He took my hands in his gaze never leaving mine. "Eleanor, my love," he said, "I have always believed that life is a series of beautiful stories. I want you to be the heroine of your own. But I would be honored if you would consider letting me be a part of it. Will you marry me?" The question wasn't just a simple query. It was a promise, a testament to his love and his unwavering respect for the woman I was. He wasn't asking me to leave my old life behind, he was asking me to start a new one with him, a new beginning, a final chapter that we could write together. I looked at him, the man who had loved me in a past life, and was now asking to love me in this one. I didn't have to think. My heart already knew the answer. My heart was still a hummingbird's wings in my chest as I stood on the beach, the waves crashing against the shore in a rhythmic whisper. William's question echoed in my mind, a beautiful, impossible dream made real. "Will you marry me?" My immediate thought was yes, a joyous, unhesitating yes. But a deeper, more cautious part of me held back. This wasn't just a decision for me, it was a decision that involved Daniel. I had spent a lifetime making my choices around him, and even now, with a new future so close I could touch it, the old habits of a mother's guilt lingered. I knew I had to tell him. It was a test. A final reckoning to see if the man I had spoken to on the phone was real, or if he was just another lie spun from desperation. I called him later that night, my hands trembling as I held the phone. He answered on the first ring, his voice warm and clear. "Mom? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. Daniel, I began, my voice a little shaky. I have something to tell you. William asked me to marry him. The silence on the other end of the line was so profound I thought the call had dropped. I held my breath, waiting for the plea, the jealousy, the guilt-ridden words I had known for so long. Would he tell me it was too soon? That I was too old? That he needed me? My heart pounded in my chest, bracing for the worst. But when he spoke, his voice was not filled with panic, but with a quiet and genuine happiness. Mom, he said, and I heard a smile in his voice. That's wonderful. Are you happy? The simplicity of the question hit me with the force of a tidal wave. For the first time, his happiness was not tied to mine. He wasn't asking if I was going to be here to pay his bills. He was asking about my well-being, my contentment, my joy. Mom, are you happy with him? Then stay. Build the life you deserve. I'll be fine. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I listened to the words I had waited a lifetime to hear. He wasn't just giving me his permission, he was giving me my freedom. He wasn't asking me to sacrifice, he was telling me to live. The phone call that I had feared would be a final confrontation became the last piece of the puzzle. The missing link to my emotional independence. He told me about his progress, the promotion at his cleaning job, the new, clean apartment he'd rented, the online classes he was taking. He spoke of his life with a newfound pride, a man who had finally found his footing. He didn't need to be rescued anymore. He had learned to rescue himself. You know what's funny, Mom, he said, his voice soft with reflection. I always thought that my life was a series of unfortunate events. But I'm starting to think that my life has been one long lesson and you, my teacher. I had to hit rock bottom to finally learn it. And you had to find the courage to let me fall. His words, once again, were both painful and liberating. They validated my sacrifice, and my decision to finally walk away. I wasn't losing a son. I was gaining a man I could be proud of. And he wasn't losing a mother. He was gaining a woman he could finally respect. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time, the silence of the Seattle night a quiet witness to my newfound peace. I walked to the deck and looked at the ocean. William came and sat beside me, his arm wrapped around me. I told him what Daniel had said, the final, perfect puzzle piece of my journey. He listened with a patient and loving heart, and when I was finished, he simply looked at me and smiled. Eleanor, he said softly. You are the bravest person I have ever known. And I would be honored to spend the rest of my life building a life with you. I looked at his kind face, at the city lights twinkling in the distance, and at the vast, open ocean that had always been a symbol of my unfulfilled dreams. But my dreams were no longer unfulfilled. They were here, with me, in the arms of a man who saw my past as a testament to my strength and my future as a promise of a love I had always deserved. I was not just accepting a proposal. I was accepting a new beginning. My heart was finally whole, filled with a happiness I never thought I would find, a happiness that came at a cost, but was worth every single penny. I had found my way home. And it was here, in the arms of a man who saw me, truly saw me, for the very first time. The final chapter of my old life closed with the quiet click of a lock on my front door. Selling the house had been a surprisingly easy decision. It held 40 years of memories, from a young wife's joy to a mother's endless sacrifice, but it had also become a prison of my own making. Packing up my belongings was not a task of sorrow, but a ritual of liberation. I kept only the most cherished items. A few faded photographs of my late husband, the tiny handmade shoes I had sewn for Daniel as a baby, and my old, worn-out sewing machine. The rest, the furniture, the dishes, the memories of a life that was, I gave away without regret. I was not leaving a home. I was leaving a past that no longer served me. My new home with William was everything my old house was not. It was modern, filled with sunlight and the scent of the sea. There were no ghosts of past struggles in its corners, only the promise of a future waiting to be built. We spent our days walking on the beach, our hands clasped, our conversations as easy as the rhythm of the waves. We cooked together in a kitchen that was a canvas of creativity, not a scene of sacrifice. With him, I didn't feel like a person with a history of pain. I felt like a woman with a future of joy. He treated my stories of past hardship not with pity, but with a deep and profound respect, as if they were the heroic tales of a woman who had simply refused to be broken. Our wedding was as simple and beautiful as our new life together. It was a small ceremony on the beach, just the two of us, his children, and Daniel. As I walked toward William, the soft sand sinking beneath my feet, I saw Daniel standing next to William's son, looking at me with a smile that was not just proud, but deeply happy. He was no longer a boy who needed a mother to rescue him. He was a man, strong and self-assured, and his tears, which streamed down his cheeks during our vows, were not tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated joy. 6 months later, my new life with William was a beautiful routine of morning coffee on the deck, walks on the beach, and quiet evenings filled with conversation. We got a small dog, a golden retriever named Sunny, who filled the house with joy. I started a small online blog where I shared the stories of my life as a seamstress and the lessons I had learned from it. My words found a small, but dedicated following, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a deep sense of purpose that was entirely my own. Daniel had also built a new life for himself. He had gotten a promotion at his cleaning job, and had used the money to get a better apartment, a place that he was proud to call his own. He was dating a lovely young woman named Clara, a kind and supportive person who valued him for his character, not for his financial potential. He would call me every Sunday, a ritual of love that was no longer a check-in, but a genuine conversation between a mother and her adult son. One Sunday, he told me that he had brought Clara to meet Jessica's mother. She asked Clara about her job, her background, and what she had to offer, he said, his voice quiet. And Clara looked her right in the eye and said that all she had to offer was her love and her respect. "Mom, I am so proud of her. She's a good woman." His words filled me with a warmth that was more valuable than any money he could have given me. My son had finally found a love that was not a transaction. He had found a partner who saw him for who he was, not for what he could give. As I sit here on my deck with William, watching the sun set over the Pacific, I reflect on my journey. I think about that terrible night in my dining room, when a cruel comment from a young woman broke my heart and shattered my world. I see it now, not as an ending, but as a beginning. It was the gift I never knew I needed. It was the humiliation that woke me up, the pain that set me free. I had spent my life believing that a mother's love was a love that had to be earned through sacrifice, a love that was measured in dollars and cents. But I have since learned a profound and beautiful truth. I learned it in the arms of a man who saw my story as a treasure, and in the voice of a son who had finally found his way home. True love never has a price, and freedom is never too expensive. I am 70 years old, and my story is not over. It is only just beginning. Did Eleanor's story of strength and renewal resonate with you? Show your support by giving it a like, and subscribe, so you never miss a new story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of her journey touched you the most?